They say some men are born with iron in their blood. But Silas Wren? He was carved from stone. Above the city, where thunder rolled like distant drums, the glass panels of Westbrook Tower trembled under relentless rain. But inside its highest floor, the storm met its match, a man colder than the weather, unmoved by sound, untouched by emotion. Silas stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, staring down at a city he owned but never embraced. Not a crease on his suit, not a flicker in his eyes. The world called him the Marble King, and no one had ever melted marble. 3 floors beneath him, bent over polished marble that had never known her footprints, Mireille scrubbed in silence. The scent of lemon disinfectant lingered in the air, mixing with exhaustion and humility. Her palms were raw from weeks of work, yet her movements stayed precise, graceful even. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She never lingered near elevators she wasn't allowed to ride. She knew her place, and still, her presence glowed quietly, like a candle that refused to go out. While Silas looked down on the world from glass and steel, Calla knelt among reflections she could never claim. He was power untouched. She was endurance unnoticed. Neither of them knew they were already connected. Beneath the dark uniform and quiet eyes, something stirred inside Calla, small, unseen, and new. She hadn't felt the change yet, not truly. Just a little more tired than usual. A wave of nausea she blamed on skipping breakfast. A sharp twist in her middle she brushed off as nothing. But within her, life was already taking shape, and it belonged not just to her, but to the man pacing in silence 3 floors above. The man who would never guess that the stranger he'd barely noticed was carrying something that could thaw him from the inside out. His child. They called him the Marble King not for riches, but for how nothing ever seemed to touch him. Not grief, not joy, not people. Silas Wren didn't bend, he didn't break. He ruled from above like a statue placed too high to fall. But down below, in a quiet corridor where discarded paper and yesterday's dirt collected, Calla swept more than debris. In that dustpan lay dreams she hadn't let die, no matter how many times life had tried to bury them. She never expected to matter. He never expected to feel. And yet, one fragile night, brief, unplanned, unspoken, planted something neither power nor poverty could undo. One night had already begun to birth a lifetime. They say some hearts are too cold to ever feel again, but sometimes all it takes is one unexpected moment to start a fire. A powerful man, a quiet maid, and a life growing between them that neither of them planned. This is more than just a story. It's a journey of healing, redemption, and the kind of love that sneaks in through the cracks. If you're ready to feel something real today, hit that subscribe button right now. Mr. Ross Story Trail brings you powerful stories every week, and this one will stay with you long after the ending. Calla Mireille was born in Fairhaven, a town too tired to lie about what it had become. It was a place where storefronts wore peeling paint like bruises, where bus stops were ghosted by promises that never showed up, and where even laughter seemed borrowed from better cities. In Fairhaven, dreams didn't break, they just stopped waking up. Her father was a fisherman with more love in his calloused hands than money in his pockets. He left one morning before sunrise and never came back. The sea gave no explanation. Her mother never asked for one. By the time Calla was 6, she had already learned what it meant to wait in silence, to keep her voice soft so the world wouldn't snap back at her. She watched her mother take in laundry from wealthier towns, ironing out wrinkles from silks they could never afford to touch, folding dresses that would never touch their skin. But even in a house weighed down by struggle, Calla didn't grow bitter. She grew steady. She knew how to stitch up frayed hems, how to soothe a fever with only water and patience, and how to hold her breath when the landlord knocked too early in the month. What she didn't know yet was just how far her quiet strength would take her. Calla's world was small, but she filled it with wonder. On weekends, while other children chased bikes down cracked pavement, she walked barefoot along the muddy shorelines, collecting broken shells with quiet hands. Each one had a story she believed, a journey through waves, through loss, through time. She kept them in a tin box beneath her bed, a treasure chest of the forgotten and the overlooked. When the wind howled through the town's narrow alleys, Calla would sit by the window with her knees tucked beneath her chin, reciting poems she'd copied by hand from library books. Words were her escape, her secret rebellion. They made her feel less invisible. Her mother, once radiant and sharp, slowly shrank under the weight of too many wash baskets and not enough rest. Calla watched the strands of gray spread through her hair like winter creeping into spring. Each wrinkle deepened like an unpaid debt life refused to cancel. But there was still tenderness between them. Her mother would brush Calla's hair with tired fingers and whisper, "You have a heart that sees too much and speaks too little. That's both your gift and your burden. Kala didn't understand it then, but she carried those words like a compass. She didn't grow up chasing fairy tales. She grew up learning how to endure when no one came to rescue you. And in her silence, something unbreakable began to form. She arrived in the city just before dusk. No fanfare, no welcome, only a duffel bag with frayed seams and a folded piece of paper with an address scribbled in fading ink. The city didn't care who she was. Its sidewalks were packed with people who looked right through her, and its buildings loomed like judges with no patience for weakness. But Kala had not come to be seen. She came to survive. Her first job was in a downtown diner, mopping floors after closing, scraping grease from ovens no one had cleaned in weeks. When that ended, she found work cleaning corporate offices, learning how to navigate hallways without making noise, how to nod just enough without inviting attention. Westbrook Enterprises was the biggest place she'd ever worked. The building stretched into the sky like it was trying to outgrow the world that made her. But Kala didn't flinch. She cleaned without complaint, arrived early and left late. She wore plain clothes, kept her eyes low, and clung to her schedule like it was armor. More than once, she brushed off unwelcome stares from security guards or glances that lingered too long in the break room. But her steps never faltered. She had come too far to be reduced to fear. Every paycheck was folded with care, part sent home to her mother, part set aside for the dream she hadn't let go of yet, to study literature, even if it took her a lifetime. She wasn't chasing anyone's attention. She was building something no one else could see. Silas Wren never knew softness. His earliest memories were filled with worn-out foster homes and cardboard boxes labeled with names that weren't his. He was 12 the last time someone called him by his full name without reading it off a clipboard. The state shuffled him from family to family, each promising stability, each proving more temporary than the last. He learned quickly, never get attached, never explain, never ask. At 15, he trusted someone, a tech mentor from a volunteer program. The man told Silas he was special, said he saw potential. 3 months later, that same man stole Silas's coding project and sold it to a startup. Silas never spoke about it. He didn't confront anyone. He just stopped believing in people altogether. By 17, he was sleeping in libraries and working under-the-table gigs while building his first software model on a borrowed laptop. By 21, he'd sold it to a global firm for more than he ever imagined. By 28, he had built Westbrook Enterprises from steel and silence. People respected him, feared him, but no one knew him. To the world, Silas Wren was precision. Control. The face of success carved from concrete. But underneath the tailored suits and boardroom victories was a man who hadn't been hugged since he was 10. He had taught himself that emotions were liabilities, and love was the biggest one of all. Kala sat in the corner of a noisy laundromat one Friday evening, her work uniform still damp from the rain. Machines buzzed around her, tumbling strangers' clothes in circles. She didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on a book in the vending rack behind the detergent shelf. An old, battered collection of poetry with a cracked spine and a price tag too high for someone choosing between bread and bus fare. She stared at it for 5 full minutes, then lowered her gaze and returned to folding towels that weren't hers. Still, something about her expression, quiet, full, said she hadn't given up the dream. 3 miles away, in the back seat of a luxury town car, Silas Wren sat waiting at a red light. On the sidewalk beside him, a young couple stood under a shared umbrella, whispering and laughing like no one else existed. He watched them without reaction. No longing, no jealousy, just distance, the kind that doesn't come from being far away, but from never having been part of something in the first place. As the car moved on, the image faded in the mirror behind him, but the hollowness in his eyes remained unchanged. 2 lives, 2 worlds, one unaware of the other. And yet, time was already stitching their paths together, quietly, inevitably. The annual Westbrook Gala had come and gone, leaving behind a trail of perfume, spilled champagne, and secrets best forgotten by morning. The building's top floors, usually locked away from regular staff, had hosted the city's elite in glittering gowns and tailored suits. Kala had spent most of the night scrubbing lipstick off restroom mirrors 2 floors down. She wasn't scheduled for upper-level cleanup, but a last-minute shift change prompted by another staff member calling in sick placed her where she never expected to be, on the 78th floor, Silas Wren's floor. The hallways were quieter there, carpeted, dim, expensive in a way that didn't flaunt wealth but made you feel like you didn't belong. Everything smelled like polished wood and control. Kala moved carefully, her cart barely making a sound. She entered the executive lounge with steady hands, balancing a tray of crystal glassware left behind from the private bar. Her eyes remained on her task, avoiding the large windows or the heavy double doors at the far end of the suite. She didn't know he was still in the building. She didn't know he'd be watching, and for one fleeting moment she forgot to breathe. Her hand slipped. The tray shattered across the floor, glass exploding like stars across marble. A sharp edge caught her palm. Blood welled up fast. Her first instinct was to hide it, to kneel, to clean, to disappear. But footsteps approached, and Calla's entire world froze. Calla clutched her hand, breath shallow as crimson dripped from her palm and pooled along the floor's perfect white seams. She scrambled to pick up the glass, ignoring the sting. Her fingers trembled. If she could just clean it up before anyone saw, before the wrong person saw, maybe this moment wouldn't cost her everything. But it was already too late. The door behind her opened with a low, decisive click. She didn't turn at first, didn't need to. His presence changed the air. Silas Wren stepped into the lounge with the silence of someone used to control, someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. He paused just inside the doorway, his eyes sweeping across the room, the spilled glass, the blood, her crouched figure. She dared a glance upward, their eyes locked. For the first time, Silas Wren looked directly at her, not through her, not past her, at her. Calla felt exposed, like he could see the pounding of her heart and the thoughts she wasn't speaking. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment but confusion. His stare wasn't cruel, it was unreadable. Cold, yes, but curious. "Stop," he said, voice low and clear. "You're bleeding." She froze. I can clean it," she whispered, eyes lowering again. "You'll make it worse," he replied. Before she could argue, he crossed the room, crouched beside her, and reached for her hand. His fingers grazed hers. She flinched, and Silas Wren, who never noticed people like her, noticed everything. Silas guided her gently to the edge of the leather couch, his touch more cautious than commanding. He disappeared into a cabinet on the far wall and returned with a sleek metal case, first aid, neatly arranged. Of course he had one. His world ran on order. Even wounds were expected and prepared for. Calla tried to pull her hand away, but he held it firmly, not forcefully, just steady. She watched him work, the way he opened the antiseptic, how he moved with precision, like someone used to fixing problems, not people. "This will sting," he said without looking up. "I'm used to it," she murmured. His eyes flicked to hers. She regretted the words the second they left her lips, but he didn't comment. Instead, he dabbed the blood from her palm with practiced care. He wrapped the gauze slowly, wrapping more than just her skin. In that silence, something shifted. "You're not one of the regular staff on this floor," he said at last. "No, I was filling in." "Name?" She hesitated. "Calla." "Calla," he repeated, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. "Calla Murray?" She blinked. "How did you—" "I read everything in my building," he said flatly. But there was a softness in his tone that didn't match his words, and she caught it. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a quiet exhale, he let go of her hand, and she realized she missed the warmth the moment it left. "You shouldn't be working tonight," Silas said, rising to pour water into a glass from a tall, minimalist decanter on a sideboard. Calla blinked. She wasn't sure if it was a dismissal or an offer. He handed her the glass. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He poured one for himself. Then, without warning, he sat across from her, legs crossed, shirt sleeves rolled just enough to show that beneath the control, there was a man who hadn't gone home either. "I'm not used to this," she said quietly. "Which part?" "Talking," she replied. "To someone like you." He tilted his head. "What do you think someone like me is?" Her lips parted, but she stopped herself. She didn't want to offend him, not when he'd been kind. But he waited, eyebrows slightly raised. "Distant," she said carefully. "Untouchable, like a wall with no door." Silas didn't smile, but the silence that followed wasn't cold. It was contemplative. "Most people want something when they speak to me," he said. "You don't," she shrugged. "I wouldn't know what to ask for." He studied her for a moment, then pointed to the scar on his knuckle. "I got that when I was 19. Broke a server tower. Thought I'd lost everything." She listened intently, surprised by the honesty in his tone. "I didn't," he added, "but it taught me not to get too attached." Calla looked down at her bandaged hand. "Some lessons hurt longer than the wound," she said softly. He looked at her, really looked, and something unreadable flickered behind his eyes. The rain hadn't let up. It drummed softly against the windows like a lullaby with no melody. Time passed, but neither of them moved to leave. They spoke for over an hour, their words drifting between long silences. Calla shared stories about books she'd never owned, poems she'd memorized from borrowed pages. Silas listened, quiet but present. "You memorize them?" he asked. "Yes. I couldn't afford to keep them, so I kept the words instead. That sentence landed heavier than she intended. Silas poured her another glass of water. She laughed faintly. "You don't drink?" "Not when I need to think," he replied. "And now? I don't know what I need right now." The room settled into a kind of quiet only strangers on the edge of change experience. The kind of quiet where no decision feels accidental. She looked at him then, really looked. The lines of stress on his face, the jaw that rarely relaxed, the eyes that hid more than they revealed. "You're not what I expected," she said. He looked up, surprised. "Neither are you." Their eyes held. The air shifted. And slowly, without fanfare, without a word, he leaned forward. So did she. The kiss was soft, hesitant, like two people trying to speak a language they'd only just discovered. What followed was not planned, not rehearsed. It was vulnerable, quiet, honest. By dawn, the storm had passed. Cal awoke to the sound of silence and the weight of an empty room. The couch where he'd sat was bare, his glass untouched. He hadn't said goodbye. But everything in her knew something had changed. The first time it happened, she blamed the spoiled coffee from the staff kitchen. A bitter taste, a spinning head, and the strange weight of heat building behind her eyes. She rinsed her mouth, splashed cold water on her face, and forced herself to continue wiping windows in the executive lobby. The second time, she barely made it off the train before she doubled over at the platform, swallowing back the nausea like it was something shameful. By the third time, she stopped guessing. The fatigue clung to her like a second skin. Every step felt heavier, every breath slower. Even her uniforms began to feel too tight across her midsection. Her back ached in the mornings, her chest tender. The scent of cleaning solutions made her dizzy. Calla kept working. She swept hallways with trembling hands, climbed stairs when the elevators were packed, smiled through briefing sessions she barely remembered. She couldn't afford to wonder. She needed to be sure. So on a rainy Tuesday, between her split shifts, she walked into a corner pharmacy with her hood pulled low. She paid in cash, didn't make eye contact, and slipped the paper bag into her tote like it carried something fragile. Her stomach turned the entire train ride back. The test sat unopened for hours in her drawer. That night, under flickering fluorescent lights in her shared bathroom, she finally did it. She watched the lines appear. Not one, two faint pink lines, soft, undeniable, final. Her legs gave out beneath her, and Calamire, who had survived every kind of silence, sat on a cold tile floor and wept for the first time in years. The tears didn't stop, not right away. Calla sat curled near the base of the bathroom stall, knees pressed to her chest, fingers still clutching the test. Her breath came in shallow waves, the kind that sting your throat and leave you lightheaded. She didn't know how long she sat there. She only looked up when a soft knock came from the other side of the door. "Calla?" It was Mary, her floor supervisor and the closest thing she had to a friend in the city. "Are you okay?" Calla tried to answer but couldn't form words. Another pause. Then the sound of the door opening just wide enough for Mary to slip inside. She knelt down without hesitation. Calla didn't speak. She didn't need to. The test was still in her hand. Mary saw it. "Oh, honey," she breathed, eyes widening. Calla tried to explain. "It wasn't planned. It was just one night. I didn't know." Mary didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. She wrapped her arms around Calla, pulled her close, and let her cry. "You're not alone," Mary whispered. "But I don't know what to do," Calla said. "He's not the kind of man you tell this to. He's not soft, maybe not. But this isn't just about him. It's about you now. You and that little heartbeat starting inside you." Calla swallowed hard. A heartbeat, a life, everything had changed. And she hadn't even said his name yet. Days passed, but the weight on Calla's chest never lifted. It followed her everywhere. In the elevator hum, the smell of lemon polish, the sound of her own name being called from across the break room. Every moment felt louder now, sharper. And at the center of it all, one question haunted her. Should I tell him? Her hands would pause mid-mop as the thought came. Her eyes would drift toward the top floors, toward him. But then she'd remember how quickly he had disappeared that morning, how cold the silence felt in his absence, how final. Silas Wren wasn't the kind of man who embraced change. He thrived in routine, in logic, in silence. She had seen him pass boardroom decisions with less emotion than a sigh. Could she really imagine him? As a father, would he accuse her of trying to trap him? Of seeking something? Would he demand proof? Would he walk away? Calla tried to imagine telling him. She rehearsed the words in her head late at night. "I'm expecting. It's yours." They never sounded right, never felt enough. And yet, hiding it didn't feel right either. This wasn't just hers anymore. There was a life inside her now, a soft, flickering presence she hadn't asked for but already couldn't ignore. But how do you hand that truth to someone made of ice? Every instinct told her to protect it, even if it meant staying silent, even if it meant raising the child alone. Calla kept her head down. She wore oversized uniforms and kept a jacket draped over her waist, even when the building's heating made the hallways feel too warm. Her shifts were slower now, every movement measured. She took more breaks, but never for long, just enough to keep the room from spinning. She smiled when spoken to, nodded when instructed, vanished when dismissed. But her hands trembled more now. She carried herself like someone balancing something delicate under her skin, which in truth she was. She stopped taking extra shifts, avoided the executive floors entirely. If she heard Silas's name mentioned in passing, she didn't react. And yet, she noticed things. His office light stayed on longer. His schedule shifted. He no longer passed her floor at 6:47 a.m. every Wednesday the way he used to. He used the private elevator more. Came in late, left early. There were rumors that he was planning something big, that he was off his game. None of them knew what Calla knew. And she told no one. She worked until her lower back ached and her feet swelled in her shoes. She covered the fatigue in her face with cold water and soft makeup. No one asked why she moved slower. No one looked closely enough to see. It was easier that way. Her body was changing, yes, but what scared her more was the way her heart had begun to change too. She caught herself whispering to the child when no one was around, promising them things, talking to them like they were listening. Maybe they were, because for the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was preparing for something much bigger than herself. Silas Wren was a man of precision, but lately, even that had started to slip. He sat through meetings without absorbing a single figure. Numbers blurred. Deadlines came and went. His assistant began repeating questions. He waved them off without answers. His office, normally organized to the inch, was in disarray. Papers scattered, emails unread, a half-full glass of water sitting untouched on the edge of his desk. He told himself it was stress, business expansion, a global contract still waiting to be finalized, but none of those things had ever shaken him before. What had? A moment, a night, a woman he hadn't seen since. He remembered the way she'd flinched when he touched her bleeding hand, the way she whispered about books like they were sacred, the way her eyes never asked for anything, even when she had every reason to. Calla. He hadn't gone looking for her. That wasn't how he operated, but he noticed with an odd twist in his chest that she was no longer on the staff schedules he reviewed. Her name didn't pass by his desk. Her cart no longer appeared in the hallway at dawn. She had vanished as quietly as she'd entered his life, and for reasons he didn't understand, he missed her. Not the night. Her. The way she made the air feel different. The way her silence had said more than most people's words. Silas Wren, who once believed emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford, found himself staring out his window, wondering where she had gone. And more importantly, why she had stayed away. What would you do? Tell the truth or carry the burden alone? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. It happened in passing, ordinary, almost forgettable. Calla had been called in to deliver a service request form to the executive floor. She tried to keep her head down, her route short. It was supposed to be a quick in and out, but the elevator doors opened too early, and Silas Wren was standing there. She hadn't seen him in weeks. His gaze flicked toward her, sharp as ever, and for a breathless moment, neither of them spoke. She offered a polite nod and clutched her bag a little tighter. "Miss Mireille," he said flatly. "Sir," she answered, voice small. The silence stretched. She turned to leave, but as she did, the corner of her tote snagged on a silver door hinge. A folder slipped free and scattered on the floor. Calla dropped to gather it, but Silas was already bending down. He picked up one of the pages, a black and white printout, blurry, medical markings. Then he saw the words, ultrasound, 11 weeks, 2 days, estimated due date. His eyes narrowed. He looked at her. She froze. "You're pregnant?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was cold, thinner than ice. She said nothing. He checked the date on the page, then looked at her again. The math was easy. His jaw tightened. A quiet fury flickered across his expression. Not rage, but betrayal. Not because she lied, but because she hadn't said anything at all. "Come with me," he said, stepping aside. Not a request. Calla followed, heart pounding. The elevator doors closed. This time they weren't headed up. They were headed into the storm. Silas closed the office door behind them, the click louder than it should have been. Calla stood near the window, one hand clutched to her bag, the other nervously resting near her stomach. She didn't know whether to sit, speak, or run. He didn't offer her a seat. He tossed the ultrasound paper onto the table between them. How long were you going to keep this from me? He asked. No anger in his voice, just something sharper. Measured, controlled. Calla looked down. I didn't think it would matter. Didn't matter? He repeated, almost like the words offended logic itself. You left, she said softly. You didn't look back, I thought. I had no obligation to, he cut in. We made no promises. Her breath caught in her throat. I wasn't expecting anything, she continued, her voice steadier now. I wasn't planning to involve you. I didn't even know for weeks you still didn't tell me. I didn't think you'd care. Silas went quiet. That hurt more than if he had shouted. You assumed, he said coldly, that I'd be indifferent, that I'd ignore the fact I had a child in this world. You've ignored people your entire life, Calla whispered. Why would this be any different? He looked away. When he finally spoke again, his tone had shifted. You'll no longer work here, he said. Calla stiffened. I'll see that you're taken care of. Discreetly. Everything you need, you'll have. He turned toward the window, hands in his pockets. It's the responsible thing to do. Calla's voice broke. Responsible? But Silas didn't answer. His silence said everything, and it cut deeper than any goodbye. By the end of that day, Calla's employment at Westbrook Enterprises was terminated, quietly, without scandal, without signatures. No one whispered about it in the hallways. No rumors followed her out the door. Silas had made sure of that. An unmarked car arrived at her apartment building that evening. The driver carried an envelope with a single note. You'll be safer here. Everything has been arranged. Inside the envelope, a keycard, a health insurance packet, and a phone with one number saved. No name. Just W. Calla said nothing as she packed the little she owned. The apartment she'd struggled to keep, the bed she barely slept in, the chipped mirror where she used to whisper her dreams. She left it all behind. The car took her past familiar streets and into a part of the city she'd never dared visit. Wide boulevards, gated driveways, a house that didn't look like it belonged to anyone real. It was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't hers. The staff at the estate greeted her politely but kept their distance. A caretaker walked her through the rooms, pointing out the essentials: kitchen, guest wing, nursery in progress. Fresh linens, stocked fridge, a medical team on call. Calla stood in the middle of it all, untouched. No one asked how she felt. No one asked if she wanted any of it. She had a place to sleep, food to eat, doctors to see. But the one thing she needed, the only voice she wanted to hear, was still hiding behind a window on the 78th floor. And he wasn't coming. The estate was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't soothe. It hovered, lingered, reminded her just how far she was from everything she'd fought for. Calla walked the halls like a guest in someone else's life. The windows were tall and the curtains expensive, but they didn't show anything familiar. Just manicured lawns and a sky that felt too wide. Her days were filled with checkups and catered meals, soft towels, herbal teas, everything designed for comfort, except none of it reached her. The nursery room was being prepared, painted in warm earth tones. She hadn't asked for it. The clothes folded in the drawers were in sizes she hadn't chosen. It felt like a future someone else had scripted for her. At night, she sat on the edge of the massive bed, hands on her belly, whispering truths only her child would hear. You are not a secret, she said one night. Not to me. She missed her old apartment, the cracked walls, the distant noise of traffic, the smell of laundry from the hallway. It had been hers, even in its emptiness. Here, in this carefully curated perfection, she felt invisible again. Worse, she felt managed. And yet, beneath the sadness, something else stirred. A quiet defiance, a promise she made to herself with every passing day, that this child would never feel abandoned, that even if Silas never came, she would rise for the sake of the life growing inside her. Not because she was taken care of, but because she knew how to care for others, even when no one cared for her. She settled in? Silas asked without looking up from his laptop. His assistant Royce nodded slowly. Yes, sir. The estate team confirmed she arrived last night. Everything's in order. Good. A pause. Royce hesitated, then spoke again. You haven't called her. Silas's fingers paused above the keyboard. That wasn't part of the arrangement, he replied coolly. With respect, sir. Arrangements usually involve communication. Silas looked up, his gaze sharp. She's safe, provided for. She won't want for anything. Royce didn't respond right away. He simply stood still, holding a report he hadn't yet placed on the desk. She didn't ask for comfort, Silas continued, almost to himself. She didn't ask for money or recognition. She didn't ask for anything, except maybe to be told she mattered, Royce said quietly. That landed harder than either of them expected. Silas leaned back in his chair. The office felt colder than usual. His reflection stared back at him from the window. Perfect suit, precise lines, lifeless eyes. "She didn't tell me," he muttered. "She had weeks, and she said nothing. And yet," Royce replied, "you're the one looking for her now." Silas didn't respond. He dismissed his assistant with a nod, but the conversation stayed. He had made all the right moves, on paper, the financial support, the relocation, the private care, but none of it had filled the space she'd left behind. The rain had returned, soft, steady, and patient. It blurred the windows of the estate and hummed gently across the roof. Inside, most of the house had gone still, except for the reading light in the den and the quiet voice carrying through the hall. Calla sat curled up on the couch, a book resting on her growing stomach, her fingers tracing the pages with affection. Her voice was soft, steady, full of rhythm, reading not for herself, but for the child nestled beneath her ribs. She didn't hear the door open. Silas stood there for several seconds before saying a word. He hadn't told anyone he was coming, not the staff, not the driver. He simply showed up, rain clinging to his coat, his expression unreadable. He hadn't planned it. He'd been in his office, looking at his calendar, when something pulled him from his chair and into his car. He told himself he just needed to check on the estate. But now that he was standing in her doorway, watching her read poetry to their unborn child, none of that logic mattered. She looked up and froze. Their eyes met. He saw her lips part in surprise. Her hand instinctively moved over her stomach. Her body stiffened, but she didn't say anything, and neither did he. For a long, aching moment, the air between them held everything that words hadn't. It wasn't the rain outside that made Silas feel soaked. It was the look in her eyes, soft, confused, cautious, and the sudden realization that she didn't expect him to come back. Calla didn't move. She wasn't sure if she should stand or speak, if she was allowed to ask why he was here, why now. But Silas stepped forward slowly, his shoes quiet against the hardwood floor. He didn't sit, he didn't speak. He simply looked at her, and then to her surprise looked at her stomach. "I didn't expect you," she finally said, voice guarded but calm. "I didn't expect to come." He scanned the room, the book on her lap, the blanket draped over her feet, the soft hum of life that had nothing to do with him, yet was tied to him in every possible way. "What were you reading?" he asked. She hesitated, then turned the book toward him. "A collection of lullabies and old poems. I found it on the shelf." "Do they listen?" he asked, nodding toward her belly. "I like to think so," she said. "Sometimes they kick, sometimes they're still. But I keep reading." Silas said nothing. He watched her hand rest on the swell of her stomach. There was something so natural about it, so protective and human, that it made his throat tighten. "I talk to them," she added after a moment, "even when it's quiet. Especially then. And this time, the silence between them didn't feel cold. It felt real. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to impress or guilt him. She was simply being, and in doing so, she made him feel like the stranger in the room. And for the first time, Silas Wren didn't want to stay a stranger. The silence lingered until Calla finally asked, "Why are you here, Silas?" Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was cautious. Honest. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the window, stared out at the wet driveway, the mist curling beneath the lamps. His hands were buried in the pockets of his coat, his shoulders stiff. "I don't know," he said at last. The words felt foreign coming from him, like they didn't belong in his mouth. Like he hadn't used them in years. Calla blinked, unsure what to make of it. "I was in my office," he continued, staring at numbers I couldn't read, thinking about meetings I didn't care about, and then I just left. She didn't interrupt. I told myself I was checking on the property, making sure the staff were doing their jobs. But that's not why I came. He turned then, meeting her gaze. "I heard your voice before I stepped in. You were reading and—" I just stood there, listening. His tone was quiet, unsteady. "I thought I'd be in control of this, that I could handle it on paper. But then I saw you sitting there, and I realized there's this whole world happening, and I'm not in it." Calla looked down at her lap, heart pounding. She wasn't used to him speaking this way. "I don't know what to do with that," he admitted. And for once, honesty didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a start. He came back 2 days later. No warning, no explanation. Just a knock on the glass door that opened into the sunroom, where Calla now spent her mornings. He brought a small bag of fresh mangoes. "They said you'd been craving them." Calla blinked, surprised. "I mentioned that once, weeks ago." "I remembered," he said simply. That time he stayed longer. Sat across from her while she peeled one of the fruits, juice sticky on her fingers, sunlight spilling across the tile floor. He asked about the baby, how far along she was, what the doctor had said, whether she'd picked out any names. She hadn't. But she was curious what he might suggest. The next time he came, he brought a list, handwritten, a few bold modern names, a few classic ones. Ezrin, he said, pointing to one, means helper of peace. She smiled softly. That's beautiful. From then on, his visits became more regular, once a week, then twice, then, without realizing it, every other day. He sat with her during checkups, asked about the baby's position, listened as the doctor explained development milestones. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. She'd read aloud. He'd listen. He brought her pastries from a downtown cafe. She'd make tea and pour his without asking how he took it. Somehow, she already knew. She laughed more. He did too. And once, as she leaned back in a chair, the baby kicked so hard it made her gasp. She grabbed his hand and placed it over the spot before thinking. He didn't pull away. He just sat there, hand on her belly, eyes wide, expression cracked open by something he hadn't felt in years. Wonder. That night, after Calla had fallen asleep on the couch, Silas remained seated nearby, staring at the soft rise and fall of her breath and the quiet hum of life inside her. He hadn't intended to stay that long, but something about the stillness made it harder to leave. His gaze drifted to a folded baby blanket resting on the armrest beside him. The soft fabric, the stitched clouds. It reminded him of something he hadn't thought about in years, a hallway light, a woman's voice singing faintly behind a closed door, and then the sound of that door shutting forever. He was 6 when his mother left. He remembered the shoes she wore, the bag she carried, the silence she left behind. He'd stopped waiting for love after that, stopped expecting it, started building walls long before he could spell the word boundaries. But now, in this quiet room beside this woman and their unborn child, he realized something terrifying. He didn't want to keep building alone. Calla stirred slightly in her sleep, shifting under the throw blanket. Her hand instinctively moved over her belly again. And Silas, who once measured success by numbers and silence, felt a different kind of weight in his chest, something fragile, something alive. If you've made it this far, you're feeling what we're feeling. Like this video, if this love story is softening your heart too. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Calla was halfway through folding a blanket in the nursery when the pain stopped her mid-step. Sharp, low, unforgiving. She dropped the blanket and steadied herself on the edge of the crib, trying to breathe through it. It didn't feel like the practice contractions she'd been warned about. This was different. When it didn't pass, she called out weakly, "Miriam?" The caretaker arrived within seconds. "What's wrong?" I think something's happening," Calla whispered, her voice unsteady. "It's too early." Miriam helped her sit, her eyes already scanning for signs. The tension in Calla's face said enough. Another cramp hit, longer this time, stronger. Miriam grabbed her phone and called for emergency transport. Then, without hesitation, she unlocked the desk drawer in the study and pulled out the reserved line, Silas's direct contact. She hesitated for only a second before pressing one. He picked up instantly. "She's going into labor," Miriam said. 3 weeks early. Ambulance is on the way." There was a pause on his end. "Which hospital?" she told him. He ended the call without another word. Back in the nursery, Calla was hunched over, gripping the side of the bed frame with both hands. Her breaths were shallow, eyes glassy. "He's not coming," she murmured. Miriam knelt beside her. "That's not for you to decide. Just breathe. You're not alone." Calla nodded, but her heart didn't believe it. She had felt abandoned before, but never like this. Not with a life inside her, not with every second feeling heavier than the last. Still, even in that moment, she reached for her belly. "You hold on," she whispered. "Just a little longer." Silas was in the middle of reviewing a legal contract when the call ended. He didn't finish the page. He didn't call for his driver. He stood, grabbed his keys, and walked straight past his assistant without a word. By the time Royce caught up to him near the elevator, Silas was already scanning the building access code on his watch. "Sir?" Royce asked, breathless. "Do you need a car arranged?" "No," Silas said flatly. "I'm driving myself, but the meeting with—" "Cancel it." The elevator doors shut. Inside the car, Silas's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. His phone buzzed with missed messages. He ignored them all. The hospital wasn't close. Traffic was thick, red lights uncooperative, his mind louder than the city around him. He didn't know what he'd find when he got there, but one thought kept looping through his head, something Calla had once said to him when he asked why she never asked for anything. Because asking means expecting, and expecting means risking disappointment. He hadn't understood it then. Now he did. She hadn't called him, hadn't waited for him. She'd gone through this alone, and somehow that hurt more than it should have. He pressed harder on the accelerator. This wasn't about control anymore. It wasn't about duty or responsibility or reputation. He didn't want to be the man who missed the moment his child came into the world. He didn't want to be the reason Calla thought she had to do this on her own. Not again. Not this time. The hallway outside the maternity unit was bright, clinical, and far too quiet. Silas stepped inside and was met with a nurse at the front desk. "Mireille. Calla Mireille," he said. The nurse looked up, nodded quickly, and pointed down the corridor. "Room 12. She's in active labor." He moved without thanking her. Inside the room, Calla lay on the bed, her face tense with pain, her hands gripping the sides of the mattress. A nurse dabbed her forehead with a cloth, whispering encouragements between commands. Calla barely registered the sound of the door opening. She turned her head and froze when she saw him. Silas. He wasn't dressed for this moment. No tailored suit. No perfect composure. Just him, chest rising, jaw clenched, uncertainty in his eyes. "You came," she whispered through clenched teeth. "I told you I wouldn't disappear," he said. "But you did," he swallowed. "I was wrong." A sharp contraction hit her, cutting the conversation short. She gasped, eyes shutting tight, a whimper escaping her lips. Silas moved beside her without hesitation. She grabbed his hand and squeezed hard, and to her surprise, he squeezed back. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I am too," he said, voice unsteady. "But I'm not going anywhere. You hear me?" Calla nodded, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. As the pain surged again, her grip tightened, and Silas, who had spent his entire life staying detached, lowered his forehead to hers and whispered the words no one had ever said to him. "You don't have to do this alone." The hours blurred. Calla's cries rose and fell like waves. Nurses moved quickly around the room, voices focused but calm. The doctor gave soft commands, checking vitals, monitoring progress. Silas never let go of her hand. When her strength wavered, he whispered encouragement. When her breath quickened, he counted with her. He was there, fully, silently, completely, until suddenly it was time. "One more push," the doctor said. Calla gritted her teeth, gave everything she had left, and then it happened. A sound filled the room, high-pitched, new, alive, a cry. Then the nurse turned, stepping toward him. "Would you like to hold your son?" He reached out. The bundle was warm, small, breathing. Silas stared down at the tiny face, the barely open eyes, the soft rise and fall of the baby's chest, and without warning, his composure cracked. Tears welled up before he could stop them. He blinked quickly, tried to breathe through it, but it was no use. A single tear fell onto the baby's blanket. Calla watched from the bed, her heart swelling in her chest, not just from what she'd been through, but from what she was seeing now. Silas Wren, the man who once lived behind stone walls, was cradling his son like he'd spent his whole life waiting to meet him. "He's perfect," Silas whispered, and in that moment everything changed, not because they said so, but because they felt it, together. When the board received Silas Wren's paternity leave notice, the reaction was stunned silence. He didn't explain. He didn't offer bullet points or forecasts. He simply cleared his calendar and handed over control, for the first time in years. The same man who once calculated his day down to the minute was now holding a newborn who couldn't tell night from morning, and a woman who had quietly changed everything he thought he knew about strength. Back at the estate, Calla tried not to question his presence. He showed up every morning, carried Ezrin with quiet pride, changed diapers without being asked, awkwardly at first, then with steady hands. He brewed Calla's tea exactly how she liked it, read bottle labels aloud like they were research papers, took notes during doctor visits, and not once did he seem distracted. She expected him to break away, to take a call, check an email, retreat into something familiar. But he didn't. When Ezrin cried, Silas picked him up. When Calla cried, once, overwhelmed and exhausted, Silas sat beside her and didn't speak. He just placed his hand gently over hers and stayed there until her breathing slowed. The man who once ran billion-dollar deals now stood barefoot in the nursery, swaying back and forth to a tune he didn't know, trying to soothe a baby who only slept in his arms. And oddly, beautifully, he didn't look lost. He looked found. The glamour wore off quickly. By the third night home, Silas had spit up on a cashmere sweater and had slept less than 3 hours in total. His hair, once immaculately styled, was now a mess of soft curls that had surrendered to exhaustion. But he didn't complain. When Ezrin cried at 2:47 a.m., it was Silas who rose, careful not to wake Calla. He shuffled into the nursery, whispering half-formed lullabies under his breath. Some were old songs from his childhood, others made up on the spot. His voice wasn't smooth. He missed the rhythm, forgot the words, but Ezrin listened, eyes wide, breathing steady. Calla once peeked through the door and saw Silas, rocking their son under the faint glow of a nightlight, humming off-key with a patience she never imagined he had. He never noticed her watching, and she never interrupted. Mornings were slow, coffee, bottles, one-handed emails that usually got deleted halfway through. Calla would sit by the window with Ezrin on her chest, and Silas would sit at her feet, his head resting against the edge of the couch. Sometimes they didn't speak, sometimes they shared quiet observations. "His eyes follow you," she said once. "He knows who keeps him safe," Silas replied. There were diaper explosions, missed feedings, and one night when Silas accidentally wore one of Calla's slippers for hours without realizing it. But in every mess, every stumble, every unpolished moment, they were building something neither had ever had. A home, not of walls or furniture, but of moments like this, unfiltered, honest, full of life. It was in the small things. Silas began learning Calla's rhythms, how she liked her toast slightly burnt, how she paused before answering questions, how she always whispered to Ezrin before putting him down for naps as if giving him permission to rest. He picked up one of her poetry books one afternoon, flipping through the pages with mild curiosity. She noticed, but didn't say anything. Later that night, he asked her to read aloud. At first, her voice was shy, uncertain, but when he leaned forward, resting his chin in his palm fully focused, her tone shifted. She read to him the way she once read to her belly, soft, musical, steady. When she finished, he didn't comment. He simply said, "Your voice makes everything sound like it matters." And that was when she laughed, truly laughed. He looked at her, eyebrows raised. "What?" "You," she said, grinning. "You're still terrible at compliments." He smirked. "I'm learning. You're trying." "That too." They played cards at night, shared slices of cake in bed, and argued over baby socks that kept disappearing. Silas still got things wrong. He often second-guessed himself, but he showed up. Every time. One evening, as she stood in the hallway cradling Ezrin, she caught her reflection in the mirror, him behind her, hands gently on her shoulders, his head resting beside hers. And in that moment, she didn't look like someone being helped. She looked like someone being loved. Quietly, deliberately, not in grand gestures, but in daily choices. And for the first time in her life, she didn't have to be strong alone. She could just be. And she was safe. Ezrin was asleep. The night was quiet, just the soft ticking of the wall clock and the low hum of wind brushing past the windows. Calla sat on the edge of the bed, reading from a worn book, legs tucked beneath her. Silas stood at the doorway, just watching. Not the book, not the lamp, not the room. Her. When she noticed, she smiled faintly. "You okay?" He walked toward her slowly, stopping just beside the crib where Ezrin lay, breathing evenly, a tiny fist curled near his mouth. Silas looked down, then back at her. "I used to think I needed distance to survive," he said softly. "That staying cold made me strong." She listened, closing the book but saying nothing. "But then I watched you," he continued, facing things alone, without asking for anything. "And somehow, in all that silence, you gave me something I didn't know I needed." He sat beside her, taking her hand. "You made me human, Calla." Her throat tightened. "I don't want to go back to how life was before this," he added. "I don't want a future that doesn't start and end with you." He looked at her, steady now. "I want mornings with you, evenings with him, nights by your side." There was no ring, no scripted speech, just him, bare, present, real. Calla's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. Instead, she leaned in, rested her forehead against his, and whispered, "You already have me." Could you fall in love with someone after heartbreak? Tell us below. And if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. They named him Ezrin. Silas had written the name down weeks earlier, one among many. But when the nurse asked for the birth certificate details, neither of them hesitated. "Ezrin Jude," Calla said softly. The name settled in the room like sunlight after a long night. Helper of peace. It felt fitting, because Ezrin hadn't just been born into the world, he had transformed it. For both of them. He had given Silas a reason to slow down, to feel, to let go of the life that looked perfect on paper but felt hollow in his hands. And for Calla, he was the first chapter in a life she never thought she'd be worthy of. A life where she wasn't just surviving, she was building, loving, living. The name became more than letters on a document. It became the thread that stitched their days together. A sound that filled the house with warmth. When Ezrin cried, it wasn't just Calla who responded anymore. It was Silas, too, not with obligation, but with open arms. Each time he whispered that name into the quiet of night, or held him to his chest during naps, something in Silas softened, not in weakness, but in clarity. This child hadn't weakened him. He had made him whole. And through Ezrin, Silas learned something no business negotiation had ever taught him. That real power doesn't come from control. It comes from care. The estate that once felt like a golden cage began to change. Calla added plants near the window, sunlight catchers, she called them. Small vines curled across the sills, a bookshelf slowly filled with novels, children's books, and eventually, her own journals. Silas moved a desk from his old office into the sunroom. Not for himself, for her. "I thought you might need somewhere to write," he said, almost shyly. She stared at it for a moment, fingers trailing along the surface. "Thank you." Weeks passed. Ezrin grew stronger, louder, more curious. He crawled across the polished floors like he was training for a race, often crashing into Silas's shoes. One afternoon, while Ezrin napped, Calla sat at her desk and began typing. The title of her first piece, The Marble King's Heart. It wasn't just about Silas. It was about walls and how they fall, about cold that becomes warmth, about how love doesn't always arrive in grand declarations. It shows up slowly, quietly, and then all at once. Meanwhile, Silas began rethinking what he wanted to leave behind. Not stock, not just concrete and portfolios, playgrounds. He built one in Fairhaven, Calla's hometown, then another in the city. "They need more than clean sidewalks," he told his assistant. "They need color, imagination, safety." He funded a literacy program, donated anonymously to shelters, not because he needed recognition, but because he finally understood what it meant to give without expecting anything back. And every night, when Ezrin fell asleep in his arms and Calla sat beside him with her manuscript in hand, Silas felt something he had never truly known. Peace, not silence, not control, but peace. Real, unshakable peace. And it was theirs. The sun draped the garden in gold. It was one of those soft Saturdays. No meetings, no noise, just the rustle of grass and the sound of Ezrin's laughter tumbling across the lawn. They'd laid out a blanket under the pear tree, a small basket of fruit and cheese, a bottle of sparkling cider. Calla wore a loose summer dress. Her curls danced with the breeze, and she hadn't stopped smiling since morning. She read aloud from a notebook, stopping every so often to let Ezrin tug at the pages with drooly fingers. Silas sat beside them, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, eyes crinkled at the edges as he watched his son chase a butterfly on unsteady legs. There was no script for this moment, no plan, just love, uninterrupted. At one point, Ezrin collapsed onto the blanket in a fit of giggles. Silas leaned back on his elbows, and Calla curled into his side without needing an invitation. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Never thought I'd be here," she whispered. "Neither did I," he replied, kissing her forehead. They stayed like that, breathing in peace, breathing out the past. Because what had started as a mistake had become something beautiful, something worth fighting for, something real. A man once called unfeeling now knelt in the grass and taught his son how to stack toy blocks. A woman once overlooked now wrote stories with her heart full and her voice steady. And a little boy, small, curious, cherished, had brought them both back to life. If this story touched your heart, like it, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more powerful stories every week. Which moment melted your heart the most? Let's talk in the comments.